Archetypes are something even people who don't really play fighting games generally have a rough understanding of. Even if you're not well versed enough to know about Shotos, it's likely that you understand the more commonly talked about grappler or zoner. But as surprise to no one, there's a lot more than just 3 archetypes in fighting games, and in this series, I want to talk about the ones that people ignore, how they're played, why you might play them, and perhaps most valuable to you at home, how to play against them. In this episode, we're going to talk about an archetype that, while well known and well loved, is subject to no videos I could find about the archetype itself, the item thrower. Surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, these characters are a mixed bag. Item throwers have a random selection of things that they can toss onto the battlefield. The player throwing most likely doesn't know what they're throwing, the vast majority of the time, though there are characters like Teddy in Persona 4 Arena that are an exception to this, but for good old Faust and Neko Arc they have just as much of a clue as you do. The items they throw are generally weighed around 70-30 good versus bad, in terms that some are purely good for them, some can be good for them, and some can be good for you or used against them. To balance the fact that this often and very quickly devolves into absolute chaos, these characters absolutely suck ass. Now, that's heavy hyperbole. There's actually S tier item throw characters, and we'll get to that in the counterplay section later in the video. But for the majority of these characters, there's a smattering of weaknesses that are anywhere from minuscule range in a game with full screen lows, or some of the worst startup hitboxes known to any human being. And generally, these characters have no sort of reversal, and no real get off me tools besides the universal ones, so they are incredibly weak defensively. And generally, they have to give up their Oki for the sake of using that time to throw an item. Their main winning state is when there's already 2+ items on screen, and at that point they can consistently use the chaos to push almost invisible or unreactable mix-ups, or they can choose to throw more random things around while you're forced to block their nonsense. Due to the nature of this playstyle, they're often somewhat similar to runaway characters, where they're waiting for utmost safety to start spam tossing and confuse you to no end. Fortunately for some, and unfortunately for others, this just so happens to be the best way to play these characters too. While there's often visual chaos with the items flying everywhere, you're pretty much just playing safe, simple, and far away from the opponent as possible, and using your longer range, slower tools to make reads and punish attempts at approach, and then when the items come on screen, you have to quickly make decisions on if you want to use them as pressure, bait, or to simply use them as a wall to make further items appear. It's for this same reason you quite often will have item characters mince through their meter to throw more items quickly, instead of using meter to grab punishes or get optimal damage during combos like most other characters would do. By right of their random items, runaway playstyle, and their poor neutral, item throwers are often, if not always, joke characters, which utterly magnetizes the funny guy type of player. And by that I in no means mean professional comedians. These are people who would laugh at their own jokes, and they're more than content doing that the rest of their own life. And that tends to be a good way to counterplay these characters. Zany, funny, weird and outrageous strategies are almost as likely from these guys as bronze rank Kens, since they rely on mix-ups that use basic system mechanics and have a pretty basic strike throw high-low game until items are on screen. It's generally a good idea to just try and anticipate something that would be silly, like wake up super, or using their floaty jump to corner themselves in your corner, or attempting to throw over and over and over. Due to their poor defensive options, not only are they more likely to burst on wake up and the like, but they're also much more susceptible to being punished for doing such things. And generally, unless you're a poor stumpy grappler who can't reach them, they're forced to play your game most of the time, unless they gain the momentum from their items being on screen and protecting them. The main thing is to just keep near them and anticipate their use of universal systems. While you can heavily punish them by using their items against them, and some even up your potential damage against them, it's less important what use the item has, and more important if they want to collect it, use it for pressure, or otherwise. If you correctly anticipate how they'll interact with the item, it can be very easy to catch item characters out. So what about good item throw players, or broken item throw characters? Amazing competitors like Apology Man and Nage pretty much put Faust on the map single-handedly in their respective game, and they make an amazing showing of using tools for keep away and are never ever seemingly at risk. It's here that a mix of knowledge of the game's systems and of your character are very important. A strong understanding of how your character's anti-airing works will do you a great deal to cope with these characters' unorthodox air movements, and paying attention to what they throw, like I already mentioned, can also reap big rewards for you, since it's very easy to tell what they actually want to get, what they don't want you to get, and what you have to avoid, which leaves them very susceptible to bait. Dash blocking, if your game allows it, can be very effective, and quite often is pretty doable to just frame guard or parry their items too, since they move in very predictable arcs. A situation that leads to a pretty hilarious gambit for Neko arc, where anyone can get a literal free last arc super on her. If you're having trouble with the chaos on screen, but the rest of the neutral is fine, let's dissect their item throwing in a different way. Before items are active, while items are active, and after items are active. Before items are active, there's two mix-ups going on: strike throw, high low, the basic mix-ups of any fighting game. And quite often, item throw characters will make it look like something's falling on your head and you have to block an incoming mix-up, but before you're put in block stun, they're free to grab you. So it's not uncommon in this scenario, before the items hit you, to get tick thrown. And similarly, there's a tiny window before the item falls on your head, where you can be hit with a low or an overhead to open you up. Technically, in this scenario, the best reward for you on defense is to break a throw, since their item is no longer in play once the tech animation plays, so they're then back at their weakest state, which makes throw an option they don't really want to go for most of the time. Knowing this, it's best to just be wary of the high-low mix-up, and what range the item character can low or overhead you from. Since the item can almost always be blocked even while crouching, as you should always do in any fighting game, you just need to keep your eyes focused on your opponent, and not on yourself, and not on the item either. If you know you only need to look for if they get into low range, throw range, or in the air or beginning an overhead, then it should be reactable in most situations, even amidst maximum chaos. And the exact same goes for during and after the item's duration. There's only one variant thing to consider for either of these timings, and that is that the god item for an item throw character almost without fail will put you into block stun for so long they can then add left-right mix-ups to the equation. In these kinds of scenarios, it's much like dealing with a mix-up character, you just need to deal with it. But if you're wary of their options, the easiest thing to consider is just, are they in the air or are they on the floor? On the floor they can almost never cross you up, so it's only lows you need to look for, and maybe one or two command normals. Whereas in the air, you then start dealing with the left-right, and anything that they can do can be blocked standing. As you might expect, there's a ton more intricacy to forming strategy against these characters, but that's too game specific for me to cover in a video like this. Just remember to add value to the risk-reward calculation in your head when you're assessing the items that they throw. Sometimes a low HP heal is wholly ignored by the item thrower, and essentially only exists to bait you, since the value of hitting you while you pick it up does more damage than it would heal in the first place, whereas something more valuable, like a large heal or a meter gain item, or something like a Faust trumpet or a bomb, is much more active and valuable for both parties, in which case scrambles become very likely, but due to the limited neutral of these characters, they can be surprisingly easy to anticipate during said scrambles. You just need to remember to keep your eyes focused solely on them, and react to what they're doing, even when you're running in to try and grab something. I hope you guys enjoyed the coverage today. I did some research across YouTube for these characters and I was genuinely shocked that even though not only do these characters spike up against player base to record heights, but multiple top tier item throwers have existed for years, and I felt that they deserved at least a bit of an overview as to what they can do and some of their history competitively. That's it for this first trilogy of videos, but I really couldn't have anticipated the incredibly warm responses from you guys to this series, so while I was going to pivot away from fighting game content for a video or two, due to popular demand, 2 more of these are coming in the very near future, and I'm looking into the possibility of even doing a move type overview series too. Have any ideas for archetypes you'd like me to cover? My next 2 videos aren't set in stone until their scripts are written, so go ahead and sound off in the comments down below if you want something clarified or to see your own favourite archetype get some coverage. And as always, you guys are free to disagree with me on where I draw some of my lines too. Any comment you leave below, I'll get back to you ASAP and try and be as evolved as I can on this as a general discussion and offer my own insight into things too. I'm not above changing some of my opinions on where I draw some of these lines, and even as I'm interacting with you guys and writing comments, I adopt new ideas into my definitions of these archetypes as I go. Whether you want to see more of Archetype Archive or you're interested in my other content, liking and subscribing to the channel is still huge for me while I'm growing, and every one of you allows me to put more focus onto making these videos to the high standard that I hold myself to. Also, in the description you can catch me streaming on Twitch, and you can join my Discord or follow me on Twitter for updates to new videos and hear about streams moments after they go live. With that, that's going to be all for this video, and as always I'll leave you all by saying, stay safe.